You asked for a sign. Maybe you didn't do it with words, maybe you didn't even realize it, but something inside you, it sent out a question, an intention, a kind of silent call that came from inside you days ago, or even weeks ago, and now it's getting a response. Why did this audio not show up by chance? It's not just another video on your screen. It's not just a recommendation. And the most interesting thing is that this makes much more sense than it seems. For more than 30 years, Jacobo Grinberg pursued a question that completely changed the course of his research. Why are there moments that seem too perfect to be a coincidence? Why do certain people, messages, or experiences appear just when we need them the most? What he found led him to explore a possibility as fascinating as it was uncomfortable. What if reality was constantly responding to something happening inside us? And that's exactly what this message is about. Now then, there's something you need to know. Most of the people who came across this video have already left, kept scrolling, looked for something else. They didn't listen to that little inner voice telling them stay a moment longer. But you did. And even though it might seem insignificant, it's not. Why? The changes that transform a life rarely start with something spectacular. They usually start like this, with a pause, with a feeling that's hard to explain, with that moment when something inside you recognizes that it's hearing exactly what it needed to hear. Maybe you can even feel it now, as if a tension you've been carrying for too long is finally starting to loosen. In fact, one of the things that caught Grinberg's attention the most during his research was precisely this. The body usually understands what's happening long before the mind does. Long before. When studying what he called the Syntergic field, a kind of information network that connects with science and reality, he found a pattern that repeated itself over and over again. The big changes didn't start on the outside, they started on the inside. And almost always they started with something very simple. A moment of openness, a moment when the person stopped fighting against everything and started allowing themselves to receive. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because most people believe that happiness works in a very specific way. They think, when I get that job, I'll be happy. When I find the right person, I'll be happy. When I have more money, when I solve my problems, when everything falls into place, then yes. But according to Grinberg, that idea contains a huge mistake. A mistake that affects the lives of millions of people without them realizing it. And the worst part is that it seems completely logical. So logical that almost no one questions it. We were taught to chase happiness as if it were a prize, as if it were at the end of the road, as if you had to earn it. But what if the direction is exactly the opposite? During his research with volunteers at UNAM, Grinberg observed something that ended up becoming one of the most important pieces of his work. When a person imagined a happy life from a state of scarcity, an invisible contradiction appeared. His mind said, I want to be happy. But his body was saying something very different. I'm not. And that was the problem. Because the mind was sending a message, but the body was sending another. And when both signals collided, reality always seemed to respond to the deeper one. Not to what the person wanted, but to what they truly felt. Think about it for a moment. You can repeat 100 times that you want abundance. You can repeat 1,000 times that you want love. You can fill a notebook with positive affirmations. But if deep down you still feel inadequate, worried, or empty, that's the signal that dominates. And according to Grinberg, that difference changes everything. This even has a neurological explanation. After years of thinking the same way, the brain creates automatic pathways. actual neural highways. And then something curious happens. Waiting for happiness becomes normal. But feeling it without an external reason seems strange, even suspicious. As if the brain were saying, wait a minute, is everything okay? Surely something bad is coming next. It sounds absurd, but millions of people live exactly like that. Scientists call it learned helplessness. Grinberg used a different expression. He called it addiction to lack, because the body ends up getting used to the chemistry of worry, to the chemistry of waiting, to the chemistry of not yet. And the longer it stays there, the harder it is to recognize that it's not your identity. It's just a pattern repeated so many times that it ended up seeming like part of who you are. But there's something even more surprising. And this is where the story starts to take a turn. Grinberg paid close attention to a detail that still sparks great interest today. The heart generates an electromagnetic field that is immensely more powerful than the brain. Stop for a second and think about what that means. Because if that's true, then the strongest signal you send out to the world doesn't come from your thoughts. It comes from your emotions, from what you truly feel, not from what you say you feel, not from what you try to project, from what happens inside you when no one is watching. And if that signal is the dominant one, then an inevitable question arises. What are you emitting most of the time? Because according to Grinberg, the field responds to that. Not to your wishes, not to your intentions, to your state. It gives you back more of what you already are. And it was precisely that observation that led him to develop one of his most well-known ideas, the theory of the Syntergic field. However, I'm going to ask you to do something strange. Mentally pause everything for a few seconds. Don't think about tomorrow. Don't think about your problems. Don't dwell on what you're missing. Just observe how you feel right now. Because as you listen to these words, your brain is creating new connections. And the question is, are you going to keep feeding the same emotions as always, or are you going to choose a different frequency? Jacobo Grinberg used to say that reality responds to the state you maintain, not to the desire you keep repeating. That's why I want you to do something that breaks the pattern. Leave this phrase in the comments. I choose a new frequency. And as you write it, feel the weight of those words. Because maybe it's the first conscious decision you make today. The proposal that there is a vast matrix of information that connects all minds, all bodies, and all matter. A kind of invisible fabric that is constantly involved in the construction of reality. And if that theory is even partially correct, then the real question is not what you want to attract into your life. The real question is, who are you when no one is watching you? Because the answer to that question might be creating much more of your reality than you imagine. And this is where Jacobo Grinberg's ideas start to connect with some of the most surprising discoveries of the last few decades. Because the more fields like neuroscience or modern physics advance, the more questions arise about something that was taken for granted for a long time. What is consciousness, really? For Grinberg, consciousness was not simply a product of the brain. It was something much more fundamental, a kind of field that we are all part of and constantly interact with. And if that's true, then every sustained thought, every repeated emotion, and every internal state you nurture day after day would be sending a signal to the world around you. A signal that little by little plays a role in how you experience reality. Now, there's another discovery that makes all of this even more interesting: epigenetics. For years, it was believed that genes almost completely determined our destiny. But today we know that the story is much more complex. Your genes are not a sentence. They are more like a library. And the important question isn't how many books are inside. The question is which ones you're opening every day. According to numerous studies, factors like constant stress, emotional habits, and the environment can influence the activation or deactivation of certain biological processes. Put simply, the way you live affects how your body works. When a person spends years trapped in states of fear, worry, or constant tension, their body goes into survival mode. And we all know how that feels. Sleeping worse, thinking worse, feeling exhausted even after resting. But when emotions like gratitude, calmness, joy, or genuine enthusiasm appear, the body responds differently. And here a powerful question arises. If your internal states affect your biology, to what extent could they also be affecting your life experience? Before we continue, do something very simple, something that will only take you a few seconds. Place one hand on your chest right over your heart. Feel the contact, the warmth, the pressure of your hand, and now breathe slowly. But this time imagine something different. Imagine that the air goes in and out directly from the center of your chest, as if you were breathing through your heart. Inhale slowly, hold for a few seconds. Well, that strange guy didn't seem to come from this world. Just one more time, no rush, not trying to achieve anything, just feeling. Because even though it seems simple, what just happened is more important than it looks. When your breathing becomes slow and conscious, your body receives a very clear message. You're no longer in danger. And in that instant, something fundamental begins to change. The nervous system stops operating from a state of constant alertness. The tension decreases, resistance drops, and a completely different state appears. A state of receptivity. A state in which the body stops spending all its energy on surviving and can start using it to create. It seems like a small difference. It isn't. Because most people spend almost their entire lives trapped in survival mode without realizing it. And it's very hard to build an extraordinary life from a body that believes it's in danger all the time. That's why Grinberg insisted so much on the importance of the internal state, because when the body enters coherence, the mind also starts to become organized. And when the mind becomes organized, perception changes. And when perception changes, everything else starts to change. In fact, there was a case that deeply marked his research. A woman whom we will call Sophia. From the outside, she seemed to have a stable life. Work, family, health, all those things we normally associate with a fulfilling life. And yet inside she felt empty, as if something vital was missing. She had tried different ways to get out of that state, but nothing seemed to work. Then something unexpected happened. When she observed certain patterns related to her emotional states, a very clear contradiction appeared. Every time she tried to feel happy, one part of her moved forward, while another part stepped back. Her mind said, "I want to feel good." But emotionally, she was still trapped in fear and lack. It was like trying to drive with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. No matter how hard she tried, she wasn't moving forward. So a different kind of work began. Instead of trying to think about happiness, he started practicing the feeling of happiness. And yes, at first it seemed strange, artificial, even a little absurd to him, just like it does to almost everyone. But he kept doing it, day after day, without obsessing over results. And then something happened that completely changed his perspective. One morning during a meditation practice, he felt a wave of well-being that appeared for no apparent reason. He hadn't received any good news. Nothing extraordinary had happened. No external circumstance had changed. It simply arose from within, and in that moment, he understood something that would end up transforming his life. Happiness is not always the result. Sometimes it's the starting point. And when he understood that, everything started to move, little by little, without forcing it. Relationships that seemed stuck started to improve. New opportunities appeared where he hadn't seen any before. His energy changed. The way he acted changed. His way of interpreting reality changed. And as a consequence, the reality he experienced also changed. Not because the world had changed first, but because she changed first. Now think about this. If there are multiple possibilities for your future, if there are different versions of the life you could experience, then maybe the most important question isn't what you want to achieve. Maybe the question is something else. From what state are you creating your reality right now? Because there is a more fulfilled version of you. Freer, happier. And maybe it's much closer than you think. The question isn't whether that possibility exists. The question is whether you're tuning into it. That's why Grinberg came to a conclusion that seems paradoxical to many. You can't wait to be happy until everything is fixed. First, you must learn to develop it within yourself, and then watch how things outside start to change. It seems to go against logic, but according to his research, that was the difference between those who spent their lives waiting and those who ended up transforming it. And the most interesting thing is that this is just the beginning. And here is one of the most powerful ideas in all of Grinberg's work. Most people wait until they have reasons to feel grateful. They wait for something good to happen first. They wait for the news, the opportunity, the change, the solution. Only then do they allow themselves to feel gratitude. But Grinberg proposed exactly the opposite. What would happen if gratitude were the beginning and not the consequence? What would happen if you learned to feel it before seeing results? The same thing happens with joy. Most people wait for life to give them a reason to experience it. But according to this view, the process works the other way around. First, the internal state changes. Then the experience changes, because the body responds to what it feels, not to what's written on the calendar. In fact, when an experience is imagined with enough emotional intensity, the body reacts in surprisingly similar ways to how it would in a real experience. Your chemistry changes. Your state changes, your perception changes, and when your perception changes, you start to relate to the world differently. That's why Grinberg insisted so much on the importance of consciously cultivating elevated emotions. Not as a fantasy, not as a game of self-deception, but as a practice, like someone strengthening a muscle. Because every time you cultivate gratitude, hope, enthusiasm, or genuine joy, you are teaching your nervous system a new way to function. You stop automatically reacting to the past and start building a new emotional reference for the future. Now, there is a particularly important time of day to do this, and most people completely waste it. It happens every night, right before going to sleep. Think about it. During that brief period between wakefulness and sleep, the rational mind starts to lose strength. The inner dialogue slows down. Defenses go down. And the subconscious becomes much more receptive. It's as if a door that normally stays slightly open swings wide open. And that's where Grinberg suggested doing a simple exercise. When you lie down tonight, close your eyes. Breathe slowly, no rush. Allow your body to relax. Relax your shoulders. Loosen your jaw. Relax your face. And then direct your attention to something very specific. Don't imagine a car. Don't imagine money. Don't imagine a specific situation. Go deeper. Ask yourself, what does happiness itself feel like? Not the cause? The feeling? How does it feel to wake up knowing that everything is okay? How does it feel to experience peace without having to prove anything? How does it feel to stop carrying the weight you've been holding for so long? Don't look for intellectual answers. Feel. Allow that emotion to appear little by little. And when it appears, even if it's faint, let it grow. Let it take up space. Let it expand through your chest, your abdomen, your arms, your whole body. Because this is where most people make a mistake. They try to control the outcome. They try to decide exactly how, when, and by which path what they want will arrive. But reality rarely follows the exact plans of our mind. And the more we try to control every detail, the more tension we create. That's why Grinberg repeated one idea over and over again. Do your part and then let go. Allow life to do its own. Now, if the night is important, the morning is even more so. Because the first few minutes after waking up are a kind of fertile ground for the mind. Before touching the phone, before checking messages, before opening social media, before loading your mind with the problems of the day, stop. Just a few minutes. Put your hands on your chest. Breathe and consciously generate gratitude, but not mechanical gratitude. Not a mental list repeated out of obligation. Something much deeper. The feeling of gratitude, the emotion, the experience. As if what you've been waiting for a long time is already getting closer. As if a part of you knew that life is working in your favor even when you still can't see it. Because most people do just the opposite. They open their eyes. They pick up the phone. They read about problems. They consume worries. And without realizing it, they program their emotional state even before getting out of bed. They start the day reacting. They are creating. You can do something different. You can start the day by setting an emotional direction before the world tries to impose its own on you. And this is where an important warning comes in, because this process seems simple. But it's not always easy. Your old programming will resist. Doubts will appear. Thoughts, excuses. An inner voice that will say, this doesn't work. You're wasting your time. Go back to how you were before. And if that happens, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means exactly the opposite. It means you're trying to break out of a pattern that's been running on autopilot for years. And no deep pattern disappears without putting up a fight. In fact, one of Grinberg's most interesting observations was this: the most important changes rarely happen gradually and visibly. Sometimes a person works for weeks, months, even longer, and apparently nothing happens. But beneath the surface, everything is being reorganized until a moment arrives, a moment that's impossible to predict. And then something changes, an unexpected conversation, an opportunity that appears out of nowhere, a coincidence too precise to ignore, a solution that seemed impossible. You suddenly realize nothing ever stood still. It was just getting ready. Maybe that's why the deepest changes usually surprise us, because they almost never come the way we had imagined. They come through a door we didn't even know existed. And when it happens, there's a feeling that's hard to explain. A feeling that many people describe in the same way, as if life were answering them, as if something bigger had been moving pieces behind the scenes all along. And maybe that's one of the most important questions of all. What if more things were happening in your favor than you can see right now? Because the answer could completely change the way you interpret your life. And maybe the most important thing of all is this. Right now, you are at a turning point. You might not see it clearly yet. Part of you might still be doubting. But if you've made it this far, something has already started to move. Because this message isn't just about happiness. It's about identity. About the story you've been telling yourself for years about who you are and how life works. And that's exactly where true transformation begins. For a long time, maybe you've been living by an idea that seems logical. The belief that you must achieve something before feeling good. First achieve, first prove, first reach, and then someday allow yourself to be happy. But according to Grinberg's vision, that's the paradigm that needs to die. Not you, not your dreams, not your goals. The old way of understanding happiness. Because as long as you keep believing that it depends exclusively on something external, it will always be one step ahead of you. It will always seem to be beyond the horizon. There will always be one more condition, one more problem, one more objective, and the goal will keep moving farther away. That's why this moment is so important, because it represents an invitation. The invitation to leave behind the version of yourself that has been waiting, and start building the version that decides, the version that grasps something fundamental, that happiness is not just a reward. It can also be a starting point. That is the big change in perspective. In the old model, you wait for reality to change in order to feel different. In the new one, you transform your inner state and allow your experience to begin to reflect it. And even though it seems like a small difference, it changes everything. In fact, if you pay attention, you might even notice it right now. Something feels different. Maybe very subtle. Maybe barely noticeable. But it's there. A feeling of greater calm, more openness, more inner space. As if a part of you had let go of something it had been holding on to for too long. You don't have to convince yourself of anything. Just observe it, because deep changes rarely announce themselves loudly. They usually come in silence. First, they change the way you think, then the way you feel, and finally the way you experience the world. That's why the next few days could be interesting, much more than you can imagine. Start paying attention to the coincidences that seem too convenient, to the conversations that appear just when you needed them, to the ideas that arrive without prior notice, to those strange moments when something suddenly clicks. Not because you have to turn everything into a sign, but because so often we're so busy looking for big changes that we ignore the small movements that announce them. It almost always starts that way. First, the waves appear. Then the tide comes in. Because the great happiness that Grinberg spoke of was not an isolated event. It wasn't a stroke of luck. It wasn't a single perfect moment. It was something much deeper, a state of being, a way of relating to life, an emotional frequency from which you begin to perceive, act, and respond differently. And when that changes, many things start to reorganize themselves. Not necessarily because the universe owes you something, but because you are no longer the same person you were before. And that changes the decisions you make, the opportunities you recognize, the people you connect with, and the paths you choose to take. That's why you could say something changed while you listen to these words. Maybe you still don't know exactly what it is, and that's okay. You don't need to name it yet. The important thing is that a part of the old story has started to lose its strength. The story that said, I can't feel good until everything is fixed. I can't be at peace until everything turns out perfect. I can't be happy yet. And in its place, a different possibility begins to emerge. a possibility that maybe was always there. The possibility of discovering that happiness is not something you have to chase your whole life, but something you can start to cultivate from this very moment. Because in the end, that was one of the deepest ideas that came out of Grinberg's work. That the external reality can influence your internal state. Yes, it can also happen the other way, and far more often than we imagine. So the question that's worth ending with isn't what you're going to achieve tomorrow, or which manifestation will come first, or how long it will take for the results to appear. The real question is different. Who do you choose to be from now on? Because that answer could have much more power over your future than you've been led to believe. And maybe, just maybe, that future has already begun.